February 1258. A man walks through his own treasury. Guards stand on both sides of him, but they are not his guards. He looks at gold he spent 50 years protecting. Gold that bought silk. Gold that paid scholars. Gold that filled vaults. While his army went without armor, the men beside him watch his face closely. They're waiting to see if he understands yet. He says nothing. Behind him, his city is burning. In front of him is something worse than fire. This is Caliph al-Mustasim, ruler of Baghdad, commander of the faithful, the spiritual successor to Muhammad himself. In 3 hours he will be dead, not by sword, not by arrow, not by any way you would expect. Because the men who destroyed his city followed rules you've probably never heard of, and what they did to his family wasn't just an execution. It was design, a message built in blood, meant so every ruler from Damascus to Delhi would understand the price of defiance. They didn't need to repeat it, they only needed to do it once. For 500 years, Baghdad was the center not just of an empire, but of human knowledge. This was the city where Greek philosophy met Persian astronomy, where Indian mathematics blended with Islamic law, where the world's learning was gathered into libraries that recorded everything from medicine to mechanics. The House of Wisdom alone contained texts that would take several lifetimes to finish reading. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra here. Al-Razi wrote medical works that Europe wouldn't translate for another 4 centuries. Scholars traveled from Spain to Samarkand just to study in Baghdad's institutions. The city's population was over 1 million. Its infrastructure moved water through underground canals. Its markets traded goods from China to Cordoba. Its hospitals treated patients regardless of religion or wealth. This wasn't a civilization in decline. This was a society at its peak, and ruling over it was the Caliph, not just a king, not just a political leader. The Caliph was the successor of Muhammad, the spiritual authority for millions of Muslims, a title passed down through 37 generations. Al-Mustasim inherited that title in 1242. He also inherited a problem, a state that had been slowly decaying for 200 years. The Abbasid Caliphate still held religious legitimacy, but its armies were mostly mercenaries. Its governors acted like independent warlords. Its treasury was full, but rarely spent on defense. Baghdad had survived weakness before. It had lived through civil wars. It had outlasted rival caliphs. It had watched empires rise and fall, while its scholars kept writing and its markets kept running. So when reports came from the east about horsemen who had erased the Khwarizmian Empire, horsemen who had emptied entire cities in Persia, horsemen who ignored rivers, mountains, and borders, Baghdad noticed and did nothing. The Mongols were not just an army, they were a system, a machine refined over 50 years of non-stop warfare across frozen steppe, desert, and mountain ranges. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he left behind something no empire had ever created before. Not just conquered land or defeated peoples, but a military doctrine that turned war into a repeatable process. One of his grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was sent west to apply it. In 1253, the Mongol council gave Hulagu a clear mission: force submission from every state between Mongolia and the Mediterranean. Not defeat, submission. The Mongol Empire wasn't built on occupation. It was built on obedience. Cities that submitted early kept their leaders, their people survived, their lives continued, they paid tribute and accepted Mongol supremacy. Cities that resisted were erased. Every target received the same sequence. Mongol envoys arrived with written terms: submit immediately, send tribute, provide hostages, usually the sons of rulers, accept Mongol authority. Obedience meant survival. Walls remained standing, markets stayed open, people lived. Refusal brought no immediate threat, no insults, no ultimatums, just silence. Weeks passed, sometimes months. Life inside the city continued. Defenders began to believe the Mongols had moved on. Then the horizon filled with horsemen, not scattered, not chaotic, organized formations, cavalry moving in coordination, siege engines arriving on wagons. The army didn't attack, It surrounded everything, every gate, every road, every escape route. Then construction began. In full view of the defenders, the Mongols built siege machines, trebuchets capable of throwing 300-pound stones. Engineers from China and Persia worked alongside Mongol soldiers. The defenders watched weapons being assembled specifically to break their walls. Then a second embassy arrived. The terms were repeated word for word. This was the final chance. Most cities surrendered here. Those that didn't face the siege, not as chaos but as procedure. When walls fell, infantry entered in units. When gates broke, cavalry secured routes. The city was taken piece by piece. Once inside, the population was sorted. Artisans were identified and spared. Scholars were identified and spared. Engineers were identified and spared. Everyone else was gathered outside the city. What followed was recorded by multiple sources. It wasn't random violence. It was systematic destruction. Survivors were relocated into Mongol territory. The city itself was often burned, not as revenge, but as proof. The Mongols didn't conquer land. They conquered obedience, and every ruined city became a lesson for the next. By 1257, Hilogu had already used this system across Persia. Nishapur refused. Its population was eliminated. Merv refused. It was methodically emptied. Herat refused and was reduced to ruins. Refusal carried consequences that echoed for generations. Now Hilogu turned his attention to the greatest city between Persia and Egypt, Baghdad. In September 1257, Hilogu sent envoys to the city, 3 riders carrying a single letter. You have seen what happened to the cities of Persia. You know the price of refusal. Come to our camp. Submit to the authority of the great Khan. Dismantle your fortifications. Send your sons as hostages. Do this and your city will be spared. Refuse and you will learn what the others learned. The letter arrived at the Caliph's court on a Thursday. By Friday, debate had begun. Caliph al-Mustasim summoned his advisors. The room split immediately. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, argued for immediate submission. He laid out the facts. The Khwarezmian Empire had fielded 400,000 soldiers. It had fortified cities and mountain strongholds. All of it was gone. Nishapur's walls were 30 feet thick. Merv had been called the city the world depends on. Both were erased. These were not raiders, Ibn al-Alqami said. This was a military system refined through 50 years of continuous war. We cannot defeat them. We can only survive them. He urged full tribute and opening Baghdad's gates before a siege began. The commander of Baghdad's army disagreed. The Mongols were steppe horse cavalry, strongest in open terrain. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. They had little experience attacking major fortified cities, he argued. They were far from their supply base and could not sustain a long siege in hostile land. A third group appealed to theology. Baghdad was the seat of the Caliphate, the heart of Islamic civilization. God would not allow pagans to destroy the city of the Prophet's successors. Al-Mustasim listened. He was 54 years old and had ruled for 16 years. He had never faced a crisis like this. Contemporary accounts describe him as devoted to comfort and learning, uneasy with military matters, and confident in the authority of his position. He read Hilogu's letter. He looked at his advisors and made his decision. "We are the Caliphate," he said. "We do not submit to threats from horsemen." He dismissed the envoys. No tribute would be sent. No preparations would be made. Ibn al-Alqami tried once more. "If we refuse, they will come." "Then let them come," the Caliph replied. The envoys left Baghdad on September 24, 1257, carrying no reply, only confirmation of refusal. What followed mattered more than the refusal itself. The Caliph did not mobilize the army. He did not reinforce the walls. He did not open the treasury to fund defenses. Life continued as usual, as if the threat might fade through neglect. 300 miles to the east, Hilogu's army began moving. On November 11, Mongol advance forces appeared 30 miles east of Baghdad. Scouts reported roughly 5,000 cavalry and no visible siege equipment. Baghdad's commander saw an opportunity. If the Mongol force was small and isolated, it could be destroyed in open battle. A victory would prove Baghdad's strength and discourage further advance. He recommended an attack. The Caliph agreed. On November 13, Baghdad's field army marched east. 20,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry. The largest force the Caliphate had assembled in decades. They carried 3 days of supplies. The plan was simple: intercept the Mongols, fight in open terrain, destroy them before reinforcements arrived. On November 15, the armies met 25 miles northeast of Baghdad. Baghdad's forces deployed in traditional formation, cavalry on the wings, infantry in the center. Across the field stood the Mongols, fewer than expected, perhaps 4,000 horsemen. Baghdad's cavalry charged. The Mongol line retreated, not in panic, but in coordination, unit by unit. Baghdad's cavalry pursued 1 mile, 2 miles, still organized, then the flanks appeared. Mongol units hidden in gullies to the north and south emerged at the same time. Baghdad's cavalry was suddenly surrounded, not by 4,000, but by 15,000. What followed was not a battle, it was a dismantling. Mongol horse archers fired while riding at full speed. Their composite bows pierced armor from 200 yards. Baghdad's cavalry tried to regroup, but the formations were already broken. Officers shouted orders no one could hear. The infantry, watching from behind, saw the wings disappear and began retreating toward Baghdad. The Mongols did not chase them. They encircled the remaining cavalry and destroyed it methodically. By nightfall, it was over. Of the 20,000 men who marched out, fewer than 3,000 returned. The Caliph's personal guard was gone. The mercenary cavalry was wiped out. Baghdad's field army no longer existed. Not scattered, not routed, erased. When the reports reached the court, everything changed. This was not a raid, it was a trap. A small force had lured Baghdad's army into the open and annihilated it with precision. By December, the main Mongol army appeared on the horizon. Baghdad's walls were all that remained. On January 11, 1258, the Mongols completed their encirclement. Hilogu commanded roughly 150,000 troops. The Mongols didn't just surround the city, they built systems. Fortified camps rose at every gate. Guard rotations were established. Supply lines stretched back into Persia. Escape became impossible. Siege engines were assembled in full view of the walls. Chinese engineers worked beside Mongol soldiers. Trebuchets rose with geometric precision. Baghdad's defenders watched day after day, fully aware of what those machines would do. On January 17, Hilogu sent another message. The terms had changed. Full submission was no longer available, but the Caliph could still save his life. Open the gates, present yourself, order your garrison to disarm. Do this within 3 days and the population would be spared. The Caliph gathered his remaining advisors. Ibn al-Qami urged acceptance. We have no field army, no allies, no way to withstand what is outside these walls. Religious scholars still spoke of divine protection. The Caliph hesitated. 3 days passed, no answer was sent. On January 29, at dawn, the trebuchets began firing. Not randomly, not for intimidation, systematically. Mongol engineers had spent weeks calculating wall thickness, weak points, and impact angles. Stones struck the same sections again and again, creating fractures in stone that had stood for 5 centuries. After 8 hours, the bombardment stopped. The Mongols waited. Overnight, the damage spread. On February 1, the bombardment resumed, focused on the weakened sections. Cracks became visible from inside the city. By evening, the eastern wall began to fail. On February 5, the wall collapsed. A 90-foot section disintegrated. Mongol infantry advanced toward the breach, walking in formation. They entered in units, secured the opening, and moved block by block. Baghdad's remaining defenders tried to hold the gap. They were outnumbered and overwhelmed. By nightfall, the eastern quarter was under Mongol control. On February 10, the Caliph sent a message to Hilogu. I will surrender. I will open the gates. I will order my garrison to disarm. Spare the city. Hilogu replied within hours. Present yourself tomorrow, alone. On February 13, 1258, the Caliph walked out of Baghdad. He did not go alone. He brought 3,000 members of the court, sons, ministers, scholars, generals. They passed through the gates unarmed. Mongol guards flanked them, silent and watchful. The procession moved through the camp. Soldiers stared, no insults, no violence, no rage, only observation. Hilogu received the Caliph in his command tent. His first question was simple. "Where is your treasury?" The Caliph hesitated. "We will offer tribute." "Where is it?" Hilogu pressed. The Caliph gave directions. 3 hours later, soldiers returned. The vaults were opened, gold ingots by the thousands, silver coins in endless chests, jewels gathered over generations. Silk enough to clothe an army. Hilogu ordered everything recorded. Then he ordered the Caliph brought there. The Caliph was led back through streets now controlled by Mongol troops, past buildings beginning to burn, into his own treasury. The doors stood open. Hilogu walked him through room after room, vault after vault. No words were spoken, but none were needed. Why was this wealth stored while your walls fell? Why were your soldiers unpaid? Why was your city unprepared? What happened next varies by source. The historian Rashid al-Din records that Hilogu ordered the Caliph to consume his gold, to eat the wealth he valued more than his people. Whether this happened literally is debated. What is certain is what followed. The Mongols followed spiritual laws that forbade royal blood from touching the earth. Spilling it directly was believed to disrupt cosmic order. So nobles were killed by other means. The Caliph was wrapped tightly in a carpet, his arms bound, his legs immobilized. He was laid on the ground outside the treasury. Horses were brought forward and led slowly, deliberately, over the wrapped body again and again. No blade was drawn, no proclamation was made. When it ended, the Caliph was dead. No blood touched the ground. The rule was satisfied, but something else was created. A message that traveled from Anatolia to Delhi. A death designed to mean more than execution. The Caliph's sons were separated from the court, all of them. Contemporary accounts agree on one detail. None survived, no heirs survived. The Caliph's daughters were taken away from the group. Their fate is recorded only in fragments. Some accounts say they were distributed among Mongol officers. Others suggest they were sent east into Mongol territory. After February 13, they vanish from detailed history. The 3,000 who had walked out with the Caliph, ministers, scholars, generals, were separated. Those with useful skills were identified and removed. Engineers were spared and sent into Mongol service. Physicians were spared. Administrators who understood local governance were spared. Everyone else was taken outside the city and executed. That day ended the Abbasid dynasty. 500 years of uninterrupted rule stopped instantly. There was no succession, no exile, no continuation. A family line traced through 37 generations to the Prophet Muhammad's uncle was cut off completely, and the news spread before the bodies were cold. After the Caliph's death, Hilogu turned Baghdad over to his army. For 13 days, the Mongols divided the city into sectors. Each unit was assigned specific districts. They moved methodically, building by building, street by street. Anyone with demonstrable skills was pulled aside. Metalworkers, carpenters, stone masons, scholars who could read and write, merchants who knew trade routes. They were marked and sent to camps outside the city. Valuables were collected systematically: gold, silver, jewels, silk, spices, manuscripts. Everything of worth was recorded and removed. Everyone left inside the city was driven beyond the walls. What followed is described from multiple perspectives. The killing was not random. It was organized. Estimates of the death toll vary widely. Contemporary writers claimed anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million dead. Modern historians place the likely number between 90,000 and 200,000. What can be verified is the aftermath. After the population was dealt with, the city itself was targeted. The House of Wisdom burned. Manuscripts were thrown into the Tigris River, so many that later accounts claimed the water ran black with ink. The Grand Mosque was partially destroyed. The Caliph's palace was razed. The canal system was deliberately damaged. This was not chaos. It was planned destruction meant to prevent quick recovery. On February 20, Hilogu ordered his army to withdraw. They left behind a city with entire neighborhoods erased, infrastructure shattered beyond immediate repair, and a population reduced by at least half. But they also left something else: survivors, people who could tell others what they had seen. The Mongols did not want Baghdad forgotten. They wanted it remembered. Within weeks, the story reached Damascus. Within months, Cairo. Within a year, every court from Anatolia to India knew exactly what had happened. Not just that Baghdad fell, but how it fell, and what happened to the ruler who believed himself untouchable. After February 1258, something shifted across the Islamic world. Cities preparing resistance suddenly changed course. Damascus opened its gates before the Mongols arrived. Aleppo sent tribute and hostages in advance. Smaller emirates across Syria and Iraq submitted without ever seeing a Mongol soldier. Because Baghdad had not just been destroyed. It had been demonstrated. Rulers everywhere ran the same calculation. Resist and face a siege you cannot win. Watch your city burn. Die wrapped in a carpet while your family is erased, or submit, keep your position, pay tribute, and survive. The equation was simple. Mongol expansion finally stopped in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut, when the Mamluks of Egypt defeated a Mongol force in open combat. But even the Mamluks had learned from Baghdad. They didn't rely on walls, they didn't trust sacred authority. They built their entire society around one goal: creating a military system capable of stopping the Mongols in the field. They studied Mongol tactics. They adapted parts of them. They prepared specifically for that confrontation. They understood what Baghdad had not. The Mongols were not raiders you could wait out. They were a system you had to match. Baghdad survived as a city. People returned, markets reopened, trade resumed, but it never regained its central place. The heart of Islamic civilization moved elsewhere. The house of wisdom was never rebuilt. The knowledge that was lost was never fully recovered. The scholars who died were never replaced. What did endure was memory, the cost of defiance. Long after Hilogu's death, long after the Mongol Empire fractured, long after the steppes fell quiet, the shape of Baghdad's fall remained. Preserved in chronicles, repeated in royal courts, weighed every time advisors debated resistance, calculated in every throne room facing a stronger force. Titles do not negotiate with tactics. Tradition does not stop siege engines. Sacred authority does not deflect arrows. When systems collide, the one that adapts survives. The one that doesn't becomes a case study, and some case studies echo for centuries. The Mongols didn't need to destroy Baghdad. They needed everyone else to know they could and would. And exactly what would happen to rulers who believed their position made them immune. That message outlasted the empire that sent it. Because what happened in February 1258 was not just military action. It was communication, written in smoke, stone, and copper-trapped bodies, a warning that traveled farther and faster than any army ever could, and once learned, it never needed to be repeated. This is Bloodstone Historian. History without comfort. If you want the patterns behind events, not just what happened, but why it keeps happening, subscribe.